Dr. Barna, your American Worldview Inventory 2024, lots of intriguing data in this, but one of the big things in the most recent release of data here is that you're looking at the hundreds of thousands of Americans who are spending a lot of money on drugs, mental health solutions, dealing with mental health elements. One of the arguments is that some of these people, and of course not all of them, but some of them might be actually treating the wrong problem. That's the way that you've worded this. Can you explain what that means?
Yeah, Billy, we're in a situation where the best estimates that we have are that about 1 out of every 4 adults has some kind of diagnosable mental illness. There's a wide range. But when we look at it more deeply, we find that those numbers are higher the younger a person is. So as you dig into it to try to figure out things like anxiety, depression, fear, suicidal thoughts, OCD tendencies, addictions, when we look at all of those, what we find is that often what may be happening is that it's not that they have some kind of chemical imbalance or physical issue that's causing that, what appears to be a mental illness. What's causing it may be their belief structure, their worldview. And if we were to address some of their core beliefs, some of those things, the anxieties, the stresses, the depression, might well go away without having to have prescribed pills or hospital stays or ongoing counseling sessions. Some people need those, no doubt about it. I'm not trying to say it's all silly. No, that's not the case. But I think often what happens is because counselors across the country, majority of them, don't really consider spirituality and faith as part of a person's mental health. What they do is they just go to what they know, which is, you know what, we can't figure it out, so let's prescribe pills, or let's just keep talking about it, or let's send you to a hospital, whatever it may be. And a lot of times that's really not the best solution.
It's interesting because when you look at American culture, and you know this better than anyone, the removal of faith values, faith practices, people will have the debate all day long about authentic Christianity versus cultural. But the reality is, from schools down the line, prayer and religious practices have been sort of stripped out. There's been an attempt to remove them over the past few decades. And yet you look at this data and this information that seems to be indicating, and I want you to correct me if I'm wrong on any of this, but that the more we pull away from faith, the more, especially the younger generations, are struggling to make sense of the world around them. I'd love for you to just reflect on that a little bit, but it seems like there's at least a correlation there.
There it is. And it's actually a pretty strong one, surprisingly strong. And it's, if you correlate these two things, let's correlate whether or not a person has some kind of mental illness, like specifically depression, anxiety, fear, suicidal thoughts, on a regular basis, not just every once in a while, but if not every day, multiple times per week. And then let's relate that to the person's worldview. And then let's also bring in the person's age. Now, when you do that, what you find is that people in Gen Z, those who are in their teens and very early 20s, you find that overall 56% of them say, yes, I consistently wrestle with those kind of mental health issues. Only 1% of them have a biblical worldview.
Wow.
Now let's look at the next older generation. Let's look at, millennials. And what you find there is that these are people, of course, in their mid-20s to late 30s, early 40s. And 49% of them, less than Gen Z, but still almost half of that generation, says they consistently wrestle with anxiety, depression, fear, etc. Only 2% of them have a biblical worldview. Go to the next generation, Gen X, baby busters, if you will. We find that 39% of them, the lowest proportion yet of the generations we've looked at, 39% say they regularly have these issues. And there we find 4% have a biblical worldview. Not huge, but much more likely than you would find in the prior two generations. And of course, that significant decrease in the incidence of those mental illnesses. Then let's go to baby boomers, the oldest of these generations, people in their mid 50s to late 70s. What do you find there? You find that only 14% of them are wrestling with those issues. When we look at worldview, 8% have a biblical worldview. So you've got the lowest proportion wrestling with mental illness. You've got the highest proportion with a biblical worldview. It's double the proportion of biblical worldview you find with Gen X. It's 4 times the biblical worldview that you would find with millennials, 8 times the proportion of biblical worldview you find with Gen Z. So you can see that there's a fairly strong correlation there between all of these kinds of issues. Can we say that biblical worldview prevents you from having mental illnesses? No. But we can say that it appears that it severely or significantly diminishes the probability that you're going to have those issues.
Yeah, well, and even looking at some of the issues like gratitude, going to church, believing that there's purpose to your life. When you look at those pieces of the puzzle, those who are doing those things, living out those faith values, those Judeo-Christian values, really the Christian values portion of it, they are experiencing all of these issues at a lesser rate as well, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. And, if we were to look at people with a biblical worldview, there are a number of things that you find in that profile for those people, which not only speaks to mental health specific issues, but also speaks to their health in general, mental health, physical health, spiritual health, relational health, financial health. We find that people with a biblical worldview are, less likely to do things like wind up in prison or to be responsible for an abortion or to have some kind of addiction, whether that's substance addiction, sexual addiction, or any other. We find that they're less likely to go through a divorce. They're more likely, based on self-report, to come out as saying that they're happy with their life, to say that they're feeling fulfilled with their life. They're much more likely to have longer lasting marriages, to rate their marriages higher in terms of fulfillment and joy. They're much more likely to have a clear and compelling sense of meaning in life. They're more likely to have long-lasting, enduring, fulfilling, satisfying relationships. The list goes on. But, the point here is that worldview isn't just about, do you believe things that make a pastor happy? Worldview is something that actually has a dramatic effect on all aspects of your life. And what I found so interesting about this current research is that I haven't seen people put together worldview and mental health. But it's not just mental health. We could do worldview in marriage. We could do worldview in relationships. We could worldview and job satisfaction. We could look at worldview and, many different factors. And we find that it really makes a big difference, which says to me, boy, the more that we can get people to put their own worldview on their radar screen, to start thinking about, what is my worldview? Where did it come from? Can I change it? What parts of it should I change? How do I change it? All those kinds of issues. I think those are great discussions for us to bring to the table.
We have to go in just a minute here, but I have to ask you, and I always love talking to you because I could talk to you for hours about this. I find it fascinating. But what is your advice in light of this latest research for Christians and for the church? How should they take this research and move forward in a productive way to help do what you were just describing?
Yeah, great question. I think one of the great things we can do is that Christianity, in large part, is about relationships. And here's an opportunity for us to, when we find somebody who's wrestling with these kind of mental health issues, stress, anxiety, depression, OCD, addictions, whatever it may be, fear. One of the things that came out of the research was a lot of these people wrestle with what's going to happen to me after I die. These are great things for us as followers of Christ and people with a biblical worldview to come alongside the people with these kind of issues and just start asking them questions about what they believe and be able to relate it back to their mental health challenges. And so whether they believe in God, whether they believe that they're going to live forever in heaven with Jesus because they've confessed their sins and invited him to be their Savior, whether or not they believe there's a biblical purpose to their life, whether or not they believe truth exists. These are the kinds of things that get us on that pathway to solving what we think are mental health issues, which are actually spiritual issues.
Absolutely. And, at a time when culture is sort of devolving in these strange ways, it's the definition of insanity to keep doing the same thing that we know isn't working. And so appreciate you and this research. And as always, joining us today. Thanks for your time.
Thank you, Billy.